Welcome, I'm Rob Ruggiero, the producing artistic director of Theatreworks Hartford, and...
Thanks, Rob. I'm Shelley Kiala. I'm the executive director of the International Festival of Arts and Ideas in New Haven, Connecticut.
Thank you.
This is our first partnership, and I hope it's one of many. We're very excited for this conversation. Did everybody see the show today? Oh, well, great. Thank you so much for supporting live theater first. I have the pleasure of introducing our first panelist. She's a director, a writer, and an exciting new voice in American theater. She's also an associate artist at Roundabout Theater in New York City, and her work was most recently seen in Connecticut as the associate director for the national tour of A Soldier's Play. She also directed this production of Queen of Basel. Please welcome Cristina Angeles.
All right. So I have the pleasure of introducing to you a friend who's been my friend for the last 2.5 years since I've been in Connecticut. Her full bio is on this Colorism handout that you have and will be online. So I won't go through the whole thing, but I'll say that her current position is as Executive Vice President of Programs and Strategy at the National Immigration Law Center. Super impressive title. She's also the most down-to-earth, amazing activist woman that I have the pleasure of knowing. And she has been such a mentor to me as I've navigated the last 2.5 years in New Haven. I am thrilled to have her with us. And please join me in welcoming Kica Matos.
And now I have the pleasure of introducing today's moderator. She is a Hartford-based playwright and actor and friend. She's been an ensemble member of Heartbeat Ensemble for over 15 years. Our audiences know her as the playwright of Moonlighters, which streamed as part of our 2021 New Work series. Please welcome Cin Martinez. And we'll step out and let you enjoy the conversation.
Hi, everyone.
Hi.
That been hot. Thank you. Me too. Let's get this party started. So we're going to start with Kica. This topic of colorism is often ignored in conversations about racism. Mm-hmm. Systems of racial discrimination operate on at least 2 levels, race and color. What is colorism? How did we get here? And how does colorism operate?
Okay. Well, we saw it in the play today. What is colorism? Colorism is the practice of favoring light skin over dark skin. And often we talk about it in the context of communities of color. African American communities. In this context, it's the Latiné community. And what you see is systems of racial hierarchy. We see them within families. We see them within society. And it really impacts and affects how people live their lives. Historically, what do we see in the context of the African American community, for example? I'll give you two quick examples. If you look at the patterns of slavery, there were often references, if you look at history, to house Negroes, right? And who were they? They were lighter-skinned, enslaved Africans. Often they were the offspring of the master and an enslaved African. And they were the ones who got to work in the households. They had access to, sometimes they were the ones who learned how to read. Why? Because they were, the assumption was that they were children of masters and they were also in a household, so they had access to more opportunities. The field Negroes were the darker skinned people who had to work the toughest jobs out in the fields. So that's really a part of the history, and you see it in the context, again, where I'm from in Puerto Rico, very similar patterns, right? So it is rooted in white supremacy. Throughout the history of the United States, I want to quickly point to how it manifests within communities of color. So in the African American community, there were 2 things, and some of you might be familiar with them. One was something called the Blue Vein Society. Who's heard of the Blue Vein Society? This happened after emancipation in the 1800s when black folks created these societies. And the criteria for you being able to be a part of a blue vein society, which gave you access to clubs and you were able to hobnob with some of the elites, you had to be able to show that you were light-skinned enough that your blue veins could show. Right? The other one is the paper bag test, right? And so the paper bag test was also a way to be exclusive, that black folks could only access certain clubs and against societies and certain privileges within the black community. If you, clearly I failed, but you had to pass the paper bag test, which means that your skin had to be lighter than the color of a paper bag. So that is how we see colorism. And it can be intraracial, and we talk about colorism often in the Black and Latina communities, but it's also across ethnicities as well.
Yeah, thank you for summarizing that, because it can get very deep. For Cristina or Kica, I once read an article in the LA Times that colorism and racism are as much part of the culture as food and music. How did your own attitude about skin tone develop throughout your life, particularly in your childhood?
I'll take it away. It's funny because so my mom is a white Puerto Rican woman and my dad's a black Dominican man. And so another one of the things that got me really excited about this play is that those different kind of Latinos were actively described in the play as such. And so we were able to finally start thinking about our people much more specifically through this play, which is really unusual in theater, period, but especially theater about the Latiné community. And I mean, there's a million examples, right? Like I first blew out my hair when I was 10 years old, and everyone was saying how pretty I looked and how much closer I looked to my white friends. Like anytime I would get a Barbie, I would want the white Barbie, not the black Barbie. And like various things like that are just like programmed into you. You know, there was never a time when my mom, Blanquita, though she may be, was like, no, you should stay. Like she never told me to stay out of the sun or things of that nature. But society itself told me like that I was less pretty than white girls. And so that's what, you know, so many of us would wake up at 4 a.m. before school at 7 a.m. and straighten your hair for 3 hours. And even like reclaiming that part of our culture is like a whole other growth process now.
Yes.
And so it really ranges across the spectrum. And I think everyone has these like various examples of when that happened to them or when they realized that there was like that level of anti-blackness within them. And so it feels like everyone's very much on their own journey towards unlearning that. But yeah, it goes way back to like me literally seeing what the Barbie looked like in my head that I got and being upset that that's the one that I got. Screwed up, I know, but it was real.
I am one of 4. I'm the youngest of 4, and a family, both my parents born in Puerto Rico. My father's New Yorican. My mother, he's passed away, my mother from a town in Puerto Rico. I am the darkest one in my family. And this is going to sound really screwed up, but building on what you said, I remember, so in Puerto Rico, the term negrita, which is a little black one, can be both used as a weapon, but it's also a source of endearment. So my father always called me negrita. And ever since I was little, I remember that in any context, anywhere I went, people would say, mira la negrita. Like, look at the little black girl.
My grandpa called me the same thing.
Negrita. And it's really hard to reconcile being called la negrita in the context of all of these pejorative terms for people who are negros, and growing up in society hearing racism all of the time. And I felt that ever since I was little, I could never escape from my own blackness. And I sometimes wanted people to stop singling me out on the basis of my race, because you know racism so quickly, you learn it so quickly, right? And I was just like, I could feel the cut. And I remember wanting to I begged my mother to straighten my hair for a long time. I said, please, because I knew that it was pelo malo is, the translation is bad hair. This is what Puerto Ricans call hair that is like mine. And I wanted to have pelo lacio. And I finally got my aunt to get the hot comb, right? She got it. It was this, I still remember the steel cone, and they heat it up and they straighten your hair. But I didn't care about the pain, right? Because I wanted to be in proximity with whiteness. And now that you mentioned the Barbies, I don't think I ever had a black Barbie. I wanted a Barbie with blonde hair.
Heck yeah, blue eyes.
Yes.
Hand it over.
Yeah, and so that is the legacy of colorism in Puerto Rico.
Yeah, and I mean, I remember my mom telling me when she married my father, her father was very concerned about the texture of our hair. That was his first, as soon as he met my dad, he was like, what do you think your children are going to look like? This should be a discussion before we move further in this relationship. And then, naturally, we came out the way we did. Y después, I'm his negrita now. And it was this whole journey.
I have so many stories too, but this is about you guys. But I will share one.
Please do. Please.
I have a sister that's a year older than me, and the rest are boys in my family. But one of the things that I remember as a child growing up is noticing how easy or quick it was for people to ask me a question instead of my sister. It's almost like the ease of overlooking her. And those moments like really got me upset, and I couldn't name it when I was a kid. I didn't understand it, but I know I felt wrong. And I was always like, I learned very young to sort of advocate for my sister, who's darker than me, whose hair texture is different than mine, but always like, speak up, and she'll cave, because she'll feel it too. Like, why are they like ignoring me? Why are they, and so very little, I was always sort of like behind her, like, just say it. Just ask for the thing, or answer her, like, or him. And still till this day, if I'm in a grocery store with my sister, it's almost like they'll skip right over her and look at me to ask something. And I'm like, she's right here. And so very early, I'm catching to call it out, whatever that thing is. And now it's like, now that I'm older, I'm like, all right, I'm just going to lean in on these people. Because my sister deserves respect, right, in all these spaces. For Cristina, we are here to lift and highlight this topic while also connecting the dots back to Queen of Basel play. Why does reflecting on this topic of colorism matter?
It's, I love me some West Side Story and In the Heights, just as a disclaimer. We love. But it is so rare to have other Latino stories told on stage. Still to this day. I think our industry, America itself, but I'll talk about the theater industry specifically, lacks a decent amount of nuance still in terms of like the deepness of the conversations that we have, especially around Latinidad. And so why I was so excited, like I said, to put this play on specifically is because it deals with our differences, and so many people don't even know that we're different. They don't even know that my mom is a white woman and my dad's a black man. They just both so happen to be from the Caribbean, And so it's yet another one of like these pillars of white supremacy that we're all learning more about every day, that we're all working to unlearn within ourselves every day. And it's like another chapter of that book that I think is so important to talk about, especially as Latiné people. And hopefully, if I get what I want, it's not the first play that you'll see that'll deal with it. Won't be the last play you'll see that'll deal with it. But it was really exciting to get the opportunity to tackle this one for sure.
Cool. Walk us through a moment after you read the play and decided to accept the offer to direct it.
I hated Julie when I first read the play. I could not stand this woman. And granted, after, a week of working with, knowing, and growing to love Christine Spang, I was hit with that good old friend called empathy, and worked to really, see this woman's humanity and to, see all the delicious flaws that we get to present for ourselves. We're not all nice. Some of us have deep-seated issues that we need to unlearn. And so when I started really digging into it, I found myself needing to really make sure I was able to like humanize her for myself and not just put her in the box that I think many of us put her in the first 10 minutes of the play. And I love being able to put plays on stage that, you know, that are just like me and my friends being gross and disgusting, basically. Because there's so many times when like you have to be perfect, you have to be nice, you have to be like meek and inherit, you have to be like so, be put on a pedestal as women of color. And this is so, she is like taken off the pedestal as soon as she walks inside. And like her whiteness and her proximity to whiteness and her proximity to white supremacy is interrogated as soon as she walks inside. Which I thought was so exciting.
Cool. Okay. For Kica, after viewing this production, what were some recognizable instances of colorism?
I mean, it really hits you from the beginning, and I have to say my first assumption when Julie walks in, I'm like, she's an American, she's a white girl, right? And she comes with all of her baggage and all of her privilege and biases. And then all of a sudden I felt like somebody bitch slapped me when she says, oh, I'm half Colombian, or my mother's half Colombian. And I thought, wow, okay, this is when the story really begins. But, you know, a lot of what happens on the play resonates in all of our daily lives, right? As a person of color, the stereotypes and assumptions that people of color are, we are intellectually inferior. We are always caught up in the web of the criminal legal system. The struggles are real, right? The struggles of both Christine and John are real, right? Having to work. And, you know, it's ironic because Julie says, I've always had to work twice as hard, right? And I'm thinking, actually, no.
Incorrect.
Incorrect. It's these other two people that you're interacting with. And so I thought it was just so many different layers of colorism. But also what undercut it is also gender.
I was going to say.
Which I thought was fascinating. It's like these two women who have fought to survive in very different ways. I thought that was that layer when it came in. I was like, wow, this is intense and deep, and I'm going to be thinking about this play for the next few days.
Yeah. For sure. And I'll continue with you. Okay. What is the difference between colorism and preferences?
Yes, and Julie clearly, I'm going to guess she had a preference for black men because her fiance was black and she got it on with John faster than a speeding bullet. How many of you have ever heard the saying, the blacker the berry, the sweeter the juice? That is indicative of a preference. And my husband is African American. He's light skinned, and every now and then when we're joking around, I always talk about my blackness and always show how much blacker I am than him. It's a source of pride for me. And he's like, yes, baby, the blacker the berry, the sweeter the juice. We have this very affectionate interaction. But in the black lingo, that is indicative of a preference for darker skin. That is a preference. You saw Julie clearly having a preference which is very different from colorism, which is a racial hierarchy. However, sometimes a preference is really racism, right?
Well put. I'm sorry, I'm over here struggling a little bit. I'm getting hot up here. But yes, you did get with him really. I don't blame. Okay.
Is Kevin here?
No, is he here? Oh gosh. Okay. What are some of the systemic consequences of colorism and its impact?
I I'm going to quickly rattle off some statistics because there have been a bunch of studies that have been done around colorism, and I knew that I wasn't going to be able to keep this in my head, but colorism is significantly associated with worse physical health outcomes among African Americans, and this is according to a 2021 study in the Journal of Health and Social Behavior. Research from Latin America has found that inequality in educational attainment based on skin color is more consistent than inequality based on ethnic or racial identification. And then the last statistic I'll share with you is Latinas with darker skin reported experiencing more discrimination and having less access to opportunities than their lighter skinned peers. And this is according to the Pew Charitable Trust 21 National Survey of Latinos.
For Cristina. Research shows that as darkness increases and Afrocentric appearances increases, so does the probability, like you mentioned, of being perceived as dangerous, incompetent, ugly, and much more. What are your thoughts about class and colorism and the duality of mistreating darker-skinned people and also fetishizing them?
It's really intense, especially within the arts, I think. After June of 2020, when George Floyd was murdered, a lot of me and my colleagues found ourselves, frankly, getting more work. And, you know, as issues regarding racism, white supremacy are being brought to the forefront more, yet again, you realize there's still a lack of nuance there because people are like, oh, well, we'll hire her, so we're good. But then we won't include her in certain processes. We won't talk to her about certain aspects of production. We won't, and this is across the board within my colleagues and theatrical institutions in America. And also within specificity in terms of who you see on stage. There's so much, you know, people say like, oh, look at this really diverse cast, and they're all the same skin color, and they're all really light-skinned, and you realize there's a lack of inclusion within darker-skinned people, although boxes are being checked because you have the half African-American, half white actor, and then you also have the half Asian, half white actor, and then you also have, and so you're physically, visually able to see the exclusion of darker-skinned people, and let alone, you know, we go through casting processes for each show that we work on, and needing to then dig in, like for this show specifically, needing to make sure we're casting a Black Latino male actor, we're casting a white Latina actress. But there are conversations that I've heard from friends of friends who have been in processes where they need to actively fight back in regards to the fetishization of certain people, in regards to wanting to cast certain people because of their level of, in terms of how attractive they are. And that's just the surface. And so I think that the more conversations we have about this, the more knowledge there is spread about it, then we'll be able to really realize, again, it's not a preference. Sometimes it's not a preference. Sometimes it's like a deeply rooted viewpoint of the world that is attached to really, really toxic behavior rooted in white supremacy. So I have no idea if I answered your question, but it's everywhere. And I think, though, while me and many of my colleagues, and I'll just speak for myself, are so grateful for, you know, the increased platforms that we've been given during the pandemic, I won't say after the pandemic, within the pandemic, it's also met with a real reckoning about, like, okay, so you brought us here, but now what? Now what are you going to do? Because me just being here isn't enough.
Yes.
I'm great and all, but it's just one step.
Yes.
Yeah.
For Kica, share with us some moments in your life that this play caused to resurface.
It is. I mean, I won't call it trauma, but it just feels like I've been in those spaces. Right, I've had those experiences, the dismissiveness, the blatant racism, the disregard, the disrespect. I'll give you a quick example. When I was in law school, there was I belonged to two different clubs, the BALSA, the Black Law Students Association, and LALSA, the Latino Law Students Association. I was told by one of the members of BALSA that I couldn't be both Black and Latine, that I had to pick. And then all of the people who were part of LALSA were all light-skinned Latines who made it their business to let me know how unwelcome I was in those spaces, right? So I would go to the LALSA gatherings and people wouldn't utter two words my way. It was almost like I was invisible. I was somebody, and then when I chatted with people, it was the contempt. It was so evident. A lot of those students, Puerto Ricans, were los blanquitos de alta sociedad. So they're white Puerto Ricans from elite societies. I can't tell you how many spaces I've been in where I have felt invisible, particularly when I'm in Puerto Rico and hanging out with elites. And so, and sometimes it's really hard because, and I'll tell you, I had a conversation for my spouse's birthday, and then I promise I'll finish with this story. My spouse's birthday, there was an activist, I will not say his name, very active in the Black community, and we were all drinking. And at some point in time, I talked about being Black, and he said, you ain't Black, you Latina. And I said, brother, I walk down the street. I have never had anybody tell me you're not Black, right? I may not be African American, but I'm a Black Latina. And he poo-pooed it, right? And so it feels like sometimes your Blackness is rejected by Latinos, Latinas, Latines, and then you're not Black enough. And so sometimes you feel like you don't really belong.
I heard that so many times, especially with the Caribbean folk, even Jamaicans, Trinidadians, and like coming into the States and just being told they're not Black enough. They're like, what? Can we talk about this? What does that mean? But how about you, Cristina? What moments from this play kind of put you down memory lane and put you in a moment in your life that you can recall?
I mean, definitely, I think I mentioned this prior, but when Julie mentions the concern regarding how dark she is, although I'm the negrita in my family, my sister tans faster than I do. So usually she's the negrita in the family, but I'm the only one called la negrita in the family because my hair is curlier than hers is. Right? But my brother came out like very olive-skinned with bright red hair. And it's so interesting, genetics, man. But it's also, and a slight addendum. But he's almost 10 years younger than me, so I'd be taking him to school, and people immediately assume I'm the nanny, not his sister, right? And so much of just, again, the concern, the well-intended concern is, I think, what really rang true, at least in my family's experience. But even then, on my Dominican side, my grandma, rest her soul, the best human in the world, is darker than I am. And when my dad first brought home an African-American woman, she said, she's not allowed here. And so it just goes deeper and deeper and deeper. Meanwhile, my grandpa, who is more olive-skinned, his dad was dark as night. But for whatever reason, if it was an African-American person, absolutely not in my house. And so it's just so layered, yet again, always coming back to white supremacy. And really just, again, on the individual journeys within my own community, I'm blessed with the opportunities to direct work about women of color, Latinas, but also I'm given a lot of plays about African American women too. But also then there's almost a level of justification that you have to do of seeing other women who may have been up for the job as well, other Black women, and then sometimes getting an eye, sometimes getting a, oh, interesting, it's your turn, and I'm like,
Right. It's almost like you have to walk. You have to walk with a photo of your family tree. Like, I count. I promise y'all.
Yeah,
it's in my blood.
It's a whole thing.
Yeah.
So it's all just those nuances. But again, like, of course, Caribbean Latinos are different than African Americans. Of course, being from Jamaica is different than being African American. There's so many differences. But again, people still very much are thinking monolithically.
Right.
And so hopefully with more stories being told, we'll be able to dissolve that.
And I think the internet is also providing access to these moments of calling these things out. And people are just like, oh, and that unlearning is happening. And I think these conversations are a little bit more palatable among like small circles, and people are like actually saying the thing out loud. Whereas before it's like, what'd you just say?
Absolutely. And I mean, for a long time, I know I'm an Afro-Latina, and this is for certain, but for a long time, I didn't want to take too much space and claim my own blackness because I was worried that I was saying too much, or I was welcoming myself into spaces that I shouldn't be. The one very vague thing that I would say is, well, my brother's really light-skinned, like I don't think that the cops are going to hurt him. And my friends had to tell me, African-American friends of mine were saying, Cristina, by being afraid to step into those rooms, to us it feels like you're denying the people inside that room. So you can be in this room and you can be in the Latino room. We contain multitudes. And so it's interesting also to be welcomed by so many of the members of that community, and then to also hear. But sometimes, you walk into that room and people are like, why are you directing that play?
Yeah.
Layers.
Talking about the internet, there was a little group here that I heard with a British accent. And I wanted to say something about colorism in the context of the internet. And I have to admit that I'm one of those people who watched the Netflix documentary about Meghan Markle and Prince Harry.
In one night.
There is a moment of colorism in that documentary that was... So you watched it too.
Oh, my God.
So there is a really striking moment, right? You see Meghan's mom. She looks like me, a black woman. And then at some point in time when the story goes into how she then becomes demonized and how race, the media, the British media really start, once they discover that she is actually a daughter of a black woman, she is a light-skinned black woman, all of a sudden it became about her race. And she's being interviewed and she says something like, oh my God, I discovered my blackness. And I just thought, didn't her mama ever talk to her about race in the world? And I really felt for her, but I thought this is colorism, and this is her reckoning with the fact that all throughout her life, up until she married a prince, she benefited from being a light-skinned black woman.
Absolutely.
And so I thought that was a moment of colorism. But anyway, I thought about it. I heard you all speaking in a very British accent, and so I wanted to give you all a shout-out and say there's a context there.
And it's funny because I remember her mother in that documentary saying, because she's so fair, I never had to talk with her.
Yes. And she says I should have.
Yep.
Prepared. What can we do, Kica, on a personal level to help end colorism?
We have to, I always say that it takes an entire society to fight against racism. And so it's up to all of us to call it out when we see it, to find our place in the racial justice fight, and to take it on. Right? I think that, and I know it's a very complicated conversation when we talk about race and racial justice. I want allies in the struggle for racial justice. I don't care what you look like. I care that you make an effort to learn about race, learn about your place in the fight, and not be afraid to take it on, right? It shouldn't be up to, and I always say, I shouldn't be the only one fighting against racism or people who look like me. It is everybody's struggle. And when I'm in Puerto Rico, Yo no tengo pelo en la lengua, right? It means I don't have any hair on my tongue. The literal translation, it means I really speak my mind. You've probably already figured that out, right? And so when I'm in Puerto Rico, I really do call out even my family, right? We have to call it out, even at moments when we feel uncomfortable.
Yeah. So this last one is for both of you, and then we'll turn it into Q&A for the audience here today. We see how the tables turned at the end of this play with Cristina. It rang for me self-empowerment, but also healing. If someone is negatively impacted by colorism, how can one heal and bounce back from it?
That's such a good question. I think representation is so important. I think community is so important. So much of the work that I've done within myself of like unlearning my own white supremacist like tendencies, my own internalized white supremacy, has been in conversation with my other friends of color, in just like hashing it out, because it's in the air we breathe, it's in the water we drink, like it's there, and so many of our experiences are so different, but also, again, they're rooted by the same thing. So community is so important, but also, I think, especially for women and femmes, living in this world that's prioritizing Eurocentric beauty standards is so difficult growing up. And I think, though, even, circling it back to Black Barbie, while I tried to fight against it in a more white-centric way when I was younger, I think seeing folks like us on stage, on screen, is so, I want to say beautiful, but it's also, being able to like see it so you can be it in that way. It's just so important. And knowing that there's like people with hair like yours who spell your name like you do, like who, it just gives you more power in like your belief that you can be here and that you can take up space and that you can, walk through those doors that you may be a little more scared to walk through. Community and representation.
What about you, Kica?
For me,
Bounce back.
I came to embrace my Blackness, right? There's a reason I have hair like I do. I locked my hair when I was in law school, right? Because I needed to be spiritually centered and I needed to be unapologetic about who I was. And so it has been a lifelong journey to be in a place where I think I manifest my healing by fighting for racial justice and immigrant rights. I have embraced my Blackness. I say I'm Afro-Boricua. I am proudly Black. And Shelley will tell you, in the last 4 years, out of a trip to Puerto Rico when... So let me just tell you the story really quickly. I was leaving at my place of work. Everybody at work knew I love Puerto Rican bomba, which is Black Puerto Rican music. They had a going away party for me. They brought this bomba group. They dragged me to dance. And I went to dance, and I turned around to the woman who dragged me, and I said, I don't know how to dance bomba. And I was so humiliated that I, as a Black woman, couldn't dance bomba. And she said, just follow me. Don't worry. So the first thing I did when I got back to New Haven is I called a friend of mine, and I said, Kevin, I really want to learn how to dance and drum. And so I started that journey 3 years ago, and today I'm part of a bomba group called Proyecto Cimarrón. And I dance and I drum and I revel in my Blackness, and it's a thing of beauty.
You're so cool.
If you don't know what bomba is or you don't know how it's danced, go online. It is
It's amazing.
so dope. And if you get to catch it in person, is even better because you really feel it inside, the whole experience. And I love it too, so we got to talk. I might join the group.
Please do.
Right? Thank you for being a wonderful audience. Thank you for our panelists. Thank you.